A mafia boss saved her after being beaten by her boyfriend. You're worth $8,000 to them, Betty. Did you know that? Michael's voice cracked as he stood over her in the alley, rain mixing with the blood streaming from her split lip. Betty tried to focus on his face, but everything was blurred, spinning. Michael, please. Please what? You think I had a choice? His hands were shaking. They said if I brought you here, we're even. The debt's gone. I can start over. We can start over, Betty whispered through broken teeth. Together. We can. There is no together. The words came out like a slap. You were always too good for me anyway. Always trying to fix me, always believing I could be better. Well, this is who I am, Betty. This is what I do to survive. She heard footsteps then, heavy boots splashing through puddles. 3 men emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted with anticipation. That her? The tallest one asked. Michael nodded without looking at her. Yeah, that's her. The debt is paid. The man grinned. We'll take good care of your girl, Mikey. Real good care. Michael was already walking away. Betty tried to call after him, but her voice wouldn't work. She closed her eyes, tasting copper and rain, waiting for whatever came next. A gunshot cracked through the alley. Then silence. When Betty opened her eyes, the 3 men were on the ground, their blood mixing with the rainwater in dark rivulets. Standing over her was a man in a tailored black suit, a cigarette between his lips, his eyes cold as winter. Michael traded your life for $8,000, the man said, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. He crouched beside her, studying her face with clinical detachment. Pathetic price for a nurse who knows how to keep people alive. Betty tried to speak, but only managed a whimper. I'm Tio, he said, and you have 2 choices right now. You can die here in this alley like the trash Michael threw away. Or, he extended a hand, rings glinting in the neon light. You can come work for me. Heal my men. Live in my house. Be under my protection. Why? Betty managed. Tio took a drag from his cigarette. Because Michael owes me more than money. And because I don't like men who beat women. He stood, his shadow falling over her like a dark promise. So what's it going to be, Betty? Death or debt? She looked at his hand, scarred knuckles, blood on his cuff, power in every line. She took it. Before we get into the main story, let me know in the comment section where you are watching from. Subscribe and share because I have more interesting stories to share with you. The car was a black Mercedes with windows so dark Betty couldn't see out. Tio sat across from her in silence, his cigarette smoke curling in the dim interior light. She pressed a hand to her ribs where Michael had kicked her, trying not to make sounds that might be mistaken for crying. You're not going to ask me questions? Tio said finally. Betty looked up. His face was angular, hard, the kind of handsome that came with a warning label. Would you answer them? Probably not. The corner of his mouth twitched. But most people can't help themselves. They need to know where they're going, what's going to happen, whether they're safe. Am I safe? From everyone except me. He stubbed out the cigarette in the armrest ashtray. But I didn't pull you out of that alley to hurt you, if that's what you're wondering. I have specific uses for people with your skills. The mansion appeared like something out of a movie, wrought iron gates, security cameras every 10 feet, a circular driveway that could have fit her entire apartment building. Men in dark suits materialized from the shadows as the car stopped, opening doors with military precision. Tio led her inside without touching her, though twice she stumbled, and he was there, steady, keeping her upright without comment. The foyer was all marble and crystal, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because it had nothing to prove. A woman in her 60s appeared, elegant in a simple black dress. Mr. Tio, you brought home a guest, Tio interrupted. Rosa, this is Betty. She's a nurse. She'll be staying in the East Wing. Get her cleaned up, fed, and bring Dr. Santos to check her injuries. Rosa's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened when she looked at Betty's face. Of course. This way, miss. Betty followed on legs that barely worked, through hallways lined with art that probably cost more than her student loans. The East Wing turned out to be a suite larger than any place she'd ever lived, bedroom, bathroom, sitting area, all decorated in cream and gold. There's clothing in the closet, Rosa said. Your size, I think. Mr. Tio is very thorough in his preparations. The doctor will be here in 20 minutes. Can I bring you anything? Tea? Water? Why am I here? The question came out broken, desperate. Rosa paused at the door. Because Mr. Tio decided you should be. In this house, that's the only reason that matters. She softened slightly. But if it helps, he doesn't bring people here to harm them. Whatever he wants from you, it's not what you're fearing. When she left, Betty finally let herself collapse on the bed. Her body screamed with pain, but her mind was louder, replaying Michael's face, the sound of gunshots, Tio's cold eyes offering her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She'd left the alley alive. She just wasn't sure what that made her now. Betty woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then her ribs reminded her, and the previous night came rushing back in waves of nausea and fear. Dr. Santos had been gentle, professional, asking no questions as he'd stitched the cut above her eyebrow and wrapped her ribs. 3 cracked, he'd said. Bruised kidney. Mild concussion. He'd left her with pills she was afraid to take and instructions to rest that seemed impossible in a stranger's mansion. A knock at the door made her flinch. "It's Rosa," came the voice. "I have breakfast." Betty pulled on the robe she'd found, silk, expensive, definitely not hers, and opened the door. Rosa wheeled in a cart laden with more food than Betty could eat in 3 days. "Mr. Tio would like to see you when you're ready," Rosa said, pouring coffee with practiced ease. "No rush. But he's waiting in his study." The study was on the 2nd floor, behind a door of dark wood that probably cost more than a car. Tio sat behind a desk that looked carved from a single piece of mahogany, reading something on a tablet. He'd changed into a different suit, charcoal gray this time, and looked like he'd slept better than Betty ever had in her life. "Sit," he said without looking up. Betty sat in the leather chair across from him, her body protesting every movement. Tio set down the tablet and studied her with the same clinical detachment from the alley. "Dr. Santos says you'll heal. 3 weeks for the ribs if you're careful. The bruising will fade faster. Thank you for." "I didn't do it for gratitude." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "I did it because you have value. Medical training, 5 years working trauma at City General before you quit to be with Michael. You're good at keeping people alive under pressure." Betty's stomach turned. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about you, Betty Chin. 29 years old. Student debt you can't pay. Parents dead in a car accident when you were 19. No siblings. No close friends because Michael isolated you systematically over 2 years. His voice was matter-of-fact, reciting details like a grocery list. Michael gambled away your savings, convinced you to quit your job, and when his debts caught up with him, he sold you to cover what he owed." Tears burned behind Betty's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Here's my offer," Tio continued. "You work for me. My men get hurt in ways hospitals ask too many questions about. You keep them alive, keep them functional, keep your mouth shut about what you see. In exchange, I erase your past. Michael's debts disappear. Your student loans get paid. You live here, safe, with everything you need. And if I say no?" Tio's expression didn't change. "Then I put you in a car with enough money to start over somewhere Michael will never find you. But he will find you, Betty. Men like him always do. They can't stand losing what they think they own." Betty looked at her hands, still bruised from trying to shield her face. "How long?" "How long what? How long do I work for you?" "Until you've earned your freedom." Tio stood, walking to the window that overlooked his estate. "Or until you decide you don't want it anymore." The dress arrived 3 days later, delivered by Rosa with an expression that suggested arguing would be pointless. Midnight blue silk that moved like water, with a neckline that was elegant rather than revealing. Shoes that fit perfectly. Jewelry that looked real because it was. "Mr. Tio has a business engagement tonight," Rosa explained. "You're expected to attend as his guest." Betty had spent those 3 days in a medical suite Tio had set up in the mansion's basement, sterile, well-equipped, better than some hospitals she'd worked in. She'd treated 2 gunshot wounds, a knife laceration, and a man who'd broken his hand on someone's face. None of them had asked her name. None of them had spoken except to describe their injuries. Now she stood in front of a mirror, barely recognizing herself. Tio was waiting in the foyer, devastating in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than her old annual salary. His eyes traveled over her once, clinical, assessing. Good. You clean up well. Why am I going with you? Because you're mine now, and people need to see that. He offered his arm. Also because you need to understand what world you're living in. Can't have you fainting the first time you see something unpleasant. The gala was held at the Meridian Hotel, in a ballroom dripping with chandeliers and old money. Betty recognized faces from the news, city councilman, a judge, the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. They all greeted Tio with careful respect, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. These are the people who pretend I don't exist, Tio murmured in her ear as they moved through the crowd. During the day, they condemn men like me. At night, they take my money and ask for favors. A woman in diamonds approached, her smile sharp as glass. Tio, darling, who's your new acquisition? Betty, Tio said. She's under my protection. The word acquisition made Betty's skin crawl, but the woman's expression shifted immediately, from predatory to cautious. Whatever being under Tio's protection meant in this world, it came with boundaries. The evening blurred into champagne and conversations where everyone said everything except what they actually meant. Betty watched Tio move through it all like a shark in elegant clothing, charming when necessary, cold when useful, always calculating. Then, near midnight, a man approached. Younger, cocky, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Tio, heard you've been moving into the East District. That's Vicente territory. Was Vicente territory, Tio corrected. His voice remained pleasant, but something had changed in his posture. Is there a problem? Vicente thinks there might be. Tio's hand moved faster than Betty could track. One moment they were standing in civilized conversation. The next, the man was against a marble pillar, Tio's hand around his throat, the ballroom suddenly quiet. Tell Vicente, Tio said softly, that if he has a problem, he should bring it to me himself. Not send children to interrupt my evening. He released the man, who stumbled away gasping. The conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. Tio straightened his cufflinks and turned back to Betty with that same clinical calm. Still want to be here? He asked. Betty's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. Do I have a choice? No, Tio said. But I appreciate you asking anyway. Betty was suturing a shoulder wound when Tio appeared in the medical suite doorway, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. The man on the table, one of Tio's enforcers named Carlos, went rigid despite the local anesthetic. Finish up, Tio said. I need you upstairs. I'm not done. He'll live with an incomplete stitch job. Finish. Betty's hands moved faster, tying off the last suture with practiced efficiency. Carlos was off the table before she'd even stripped off her gloves, leaving her alone with Tio and a feeling of dread that settled in her stomach like lead. There's someone I want you to meet, Tio said, leading her through the mansion to a part she'd never seen, a wing that required keycards and had soundproofed walls. The basement level. The place Rosa had warned her never to wander into by accident. The room at the end of the hall was concrete and steel, lit by a single overhead bulb. A man was tied to a chair in the center, his face already swollen, blood crusting around his nose. Betty recognized him immediately. The tallest one from the alley, the one who'd grinned when Michael said she was theirs. No, Betty whispered. Tio, I don't want. This isn't about what you want. Tio's voice was flat. This is about what you need to understand. You think I saved you out of kindness? Out of some moral code. He walked to the man, circling him like a predator. I saved you because Michael stole from me. Because these animals thought they could operate in my city without consequences. The man's eyes found Betty, wide with terror. Please, I didn't know she was his. Tio backhanded him casually, the way someone might swat a fly. She's not mine. She's under my protection, which is worse for you. He turned to Betty. Do you know what he was going to do to you that night? Before I arrived. Betty couldn't speak. Couldn't move. He was going to film it, Tio continued. Sell the video to pay off his own debts. You weren't even worth $8,000 to him. You were worth whatever sick men would pay to watch. He pulled out a knife, the blade catching the light. So now I'm going to give you a choice, Betty. I can kill him quickly. Or I can make sure he understands, really understands, what it feels like to be helpless. I don't want this, Betty managed. I'm a nurse. I save people. You save my people. You heal the men who protect my territory, who enforce my rules. Tio pressed the knife against the man's throat, not cutting, just promising. But this is how we stay safe. This is how we make sure Michael's friends know what happens when they touch what's mine. The man began sobbing, begging in broken sentences. Betty closed her eyes, but Tio's voice cut through the darkness. No, you watch. You're part of this world now. You don't get to look away. So she watched, and something inside her that had survived Michael finally shattered. Betty didn't sleep for 3 days after the basement. She moved through her duties like an automaton, stitching wounds, setting broken bones, dispensing medication, while replaying the sound of the man's screams. Tio had been methodical, almost clinical, in his violence. It was the calm that haunted her most. The message came through on a phone she didn't know she had. Rosa delivered it with breakfast, a sleek smartphone, completely set up, with one unread text from an unknown number. Betty, please God, please, if you ever loved me, you have to help. Her hands shook as she opened the message thread. They have me. Tio's men. They're going to kill me like they killed the others. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. Please, Betty, you're the only one who can save me. A photo followed. Michael, bound to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, his face bruised, one eye swollen shut. The image was too clear, too perfect. Staged, some rational part of her brain whispered. But the irrational part, the part that had spent 2 years loving him, believing in him, trying to fix him, saw only suffering. Another text. They said if you come alone, they'll let me go. Just you. No one else. Please, Betty, I don't want to die. She found Tio in his study, documents spread across his desk like a battlefield strategy. He looked up when she entered, taking in her expression with those calculating eyes. Michael contacted you, he said. Not a question. Betty held out the phone. He says your men have him, that they're going to kill him. Tio took the phone, scrolled through the messages without reaction. Interesting. Is it true? No. He tossed the phone back to her. My men don't have Michael. If they did, he'd already be dead. He leaned back in his chair. This is bait, Betty. Michael's working with someone who wants to get to me through you. How do you know? Because I know how these things work. Michael's a coward. Cowards don't act alone. They find bigger predators to hide behind. Tio's expression hardened. Someone offered him protection in exchange for delivering you. Probably the same cartel that sent those men to the alley. Betty's phone buzzed again. Another message, 30 minutes. Old St. Mary's Hospital on 5th. Come alone or I'm dead. Don't, Tio said, reading her face. Whatever you're thinking, don't. He could actually be dying. He sold you to be raped and murdered for $8,000. Tio's voice was ice. He doesn't deserve your empathy. Maybe not. Betty met his eyes, surprised by her own steadiness. But I deserve to be the kind of person who tries to save people. Even the ones who don't deserve it. That's what makes me different from you. Something flickered across Tio's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. If you go, you die. Or worse. Then come with me, Betty said. Keep me safe the way you promised. Tio stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing she'd ever seen. You're learning. That's good. He stood, reaching for his jacket. But this is going to cost you, Betty. Everything has a price in my world. What's the price? Watching me finish what Michael started. No looking away this time. They didn't go to St. Mary's. Tio sent a team instead. 4 men in 2 cars, armed and efficient. He watched their progress on a tablet from his study while Betty paced like a caged animal, checking her phone every 30 seconds for updates she knew wouldn't come. They found the warehouse, Tio said finally. Michael's there, along with 3 of Vicente's men. Amateur setup. They weren't even watching the back entrance. Is he alive? For now. Tio's fingers moved across the screen. My men are extracting him. We'll have him here within the hour. Betty should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollow. And then what? Then you get to see if he's worth the empathy you're wasting on him. Tio set down the tablet and looked at her properly for the first time that evening. You're angry with me. You made me watch you torture someone. I made you see the truth about the world you're living in. There's a difference between truth and cruelty. Betty stopped pacing, exhaustion finally catching up with adrenaline. You didn't have to make it last that long. You didn't have to make me watch. Tio was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and did something unexpected. He started unbuttoning his shirt. Betty tensed, but he wasn't moving toward her. He was simply removing the expensive fabric, revealing the body underneath. It was a roadmap of violence. Knife scars crisscrossed his torso, some old and faded, others relatively fresh. A bullet wound near his shoulder. Burns on his ribs that looked like cigarettes. His back, when he turned, was worse. Long scars that could only have come from a whip or something similar. My father was a debt collector for the Moretti family, Tio said, his voice devoid of emotion. When I was 8, he was late on a payment to his own bosses. They came to our house, made my mother and me watch while they taught him what happened to people who stole. He touched one of the scars on his chest. When they were done with him, they started on me. Said I needed to learn young. Betty's anger drained away, replaced by something worse, understanding. I was 12 when I killed my first man. 15 when I took over my father's territory. 20 when I built this empire. Tio turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something human in his eyes. I didn't make you watch that man suffer because I'm cruel, Betty. I made you watch because this world doesn't give you the luxury of looking away. The moment you close your eyes, someone puts a knife in your back. That's not a world, Betty whispered. That's hell. Yes. Tio pulled his shirt back on with precise movements. But it's my hell. And now it's yours too. Betty crossed the space between them before she could think better of it. She reached out, fingers hovering over the button of his shirt. Let me see them again. Why? Because I'm a nurse. Because I see scars differently than other people. She met his eyes. Because maybe you need someone to look at your wounds without flinching. Tio's hand caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly. Be careful, Betty. Empathy is what got you beaten in an alley. And violence is what made you who you are. She didn't pull away. Maybe we're both broken in ways we can't fix. His grip loosened. In the silence that followed, something shifted between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two people marked by different kinds of violence, standing in a study filled with the trappings of power that couldn't protect either of them from their own histories. Michael will be here soon, Tio said finally, releasing her wrist. You should decide what you want to say to him. But Betty wasn't thinking about Michael anymore. Michael arrived in a black SUV, flanked by 2 of Tio's men who handled him like contaminated evidence. He looked worse than the photo, genuinely beaten this time, limping, his face a canvas of bruises that hadn't been staged for sympathy. Betty, he gasped when he saw her, trying to lurch forward. The guards held him back. Thank God. I knew you'd come. I knew you'd save me. Tio stood behind his desk like a judge at a tribunal. Search him. They found a phone, a wallet with someone else's credit cards, and a small recording device taped to his chest. Tio examined the device with clinical interest before crushing it under his heel. Vicente's tech, he said. Not bad quality. They were listening to everything. He looked at Michael with something close to boredom. So what was the plan? Betty shows up at the hospital, they grab her, and you get, what? Your debt's forgiven? A ticket out of the city. Michael's eyes darted between Tio and Betty, calculating. I don't know what you're talking about. They kidnapped me. I'm a victim here. You're a lot of things, Michael. Victim isn't one of them. Tio circled the desk, predatory. Here's what actually happened. Vicente's men approached you after I killed their friends in the alley. They offered you protection if you could deliver Betty. You sent those texts, set up the meeting, probably promised them she'd come alone. That's insane. The hospital was the trap, Tio continued. Old building, multiple exits, easy to control. They'd take Betty, use her as leverage against me, and you'd disappear with whatever they paid you. He paused. Except you're not smart enough to plan something like that on your own. So tell me, was it Vicente himself or one of his lieutenants? Michael's face crumbled. They were going to kill me. What was I supposed to do? Die, Tio said simply. You were supposed to die for what you did. Betty had been silent through all of it, watching Michael with a detachment that surprised her. This man had shared her bed, made promises about their future, convinced her to give up everything for a love that had only ever existed in her imagination. And now he stood before her, still making excuses, still thinking he could talk his way out of consequences. Look at me, she said quietly. Michael met her eyes, and she saw the calculation there. The performance of remorse designed to manipulate her one more time. You sold me twice, Betty said. Once in the alley, and now again. You used my empathy like a weapon, knowing I'd try to save you even after everything you did. She stepped closer, and Michael actually flinched. But here's what you never understood about me, Michael. I don't save people who don't want to be saved. I save people who deserve a second chance. Betty, please. You had your second chance. You used it to dig your grave deeper. She turned to Tio. I'm done. Whatever you're going to do with him, do it without me. Betty. Michael lunged against the guards holding him. You can't just leave me. After everything She walked out, his voice following her down the hallway, finally fading into silence. Behind her, she heard Tio give a quiet order, heard Michael's protests turn to screams. This time, she didn't look back. Betty was in the medical suite when the alarms started. Red lights flashing, a sound like a submarine diving, footsteps thundering through the mansion's corridors. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her usual composure cracked. They're coming, she said. Vicente's men. They breached the east perimeter. How many? 20, maybe more. Mr. Tio wants you in the safe room. Now. The safe room was in the mansion's core, steel walls, independent air supply, enough supplies to last a week. Tio was already there, surrounded by monitors showing different angles of his property. Armed men moved across the screens like pieces on a chessboard. This is about Michael, Betty said. This is about disrespect. Tio's voice was ice as he watched Vicente's forces advance. They came to my home, my territory. They think they can take what's mine and I'll negotiate. He turned to her, and his eyes held something feral. I don't negotiate, Betty. I eliminate. He started giving orders through a headset, tactical, efficient, a general commanding troops. Betty watched on the monitors as his men engaged Vicente's forces. Gunfire lit up the darkness. Bodies fell on both sides. How many people are going to die because of me? She whispered. None of this is because of you. Tio pulled off the headset for a moment. This was always coming. Vicente's been pushing at my territory for months. Michael, and you were just the excuse he needed to move openly. He touched her face, surprisingly gentle. But he made a mistake coming here. He gave me justification to end this permanently. The battle lasted 30 minutes. When the shooting stopped, Tio's men had captured 5 of Vicente's soldiers. The rest were dead or had retreated. Where's Vicente? Tio demanded through the headset. The answer came back. Vicente had never left his own headquarters, a warehouse complex on the city's industrial edge. He'd sent his men to die while he stayed safe behind his own walls. Tio's smile was terrible to see. Rosa, stay with Betty. Don't open this door until I come back. Where are you going? Betty asked, though she already knew. To teach Vicente what happens when you attack my home. He checked his weapon with practiced ease. I'll be back by morning. Tio. Yes. Don't die. The words came out before she could stop them. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't read. Worried about me, nurse? Someone has to be. He left without another word. Betty watched on the monitors as he assembled a team, his best men, heavily armed, moving with military precision. They loaded into 3 vehicles and disappeared into the night. The hours that followed were the longest of Betty's life. Rosa made tea that went cold. The monitors showed nothing but empty grounds, security lights casting shadows that looked like threats. Betty tried to read, tried to sleep, tried to do anything but imagine what was happening in that warehouse. Then, at 4 in the morning, the monitors flared with light. Not on Tio's property, somewhere else, visible in the distance through one of the exterior cameras. An explosion, massive and orange, turning night into day. Rosa crossed herself. He actually did it. He leveled the entire complex. Betty's phone buzzed. A text from Tio. It's done. Vicente won't be a problem anymore. Neither will anyone else who thinks they can touch you. Another message followed, just 2 words. Coming home. Tio returned at dawn, covered in ash and blood that wasn't his own. Betty was waiting in the foyer despite Rosa's protests, unable to stay locked away while he'd been fighting a war she'd somehow started. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his exhausted face. You should be resting. So should you. She approached him carefully, the nurse in her cataloging injuries. A cut above his eyebrow, bruised knuckles, the way he favored his left side. You're hurt. I've had worse. That doesn't mean you should ignore it. She reached for his hand, examining the split skin across his knuckles. Come to the medical suite. Let me clean this up. They didn't speak as she worked, the silence comfortable in a way that surprised them both. Betty's hands were steady as she cleaned wounds, applied antiseptic, wrapped bandages. Tio watched her face the entire time, something unreadable in his expression. Vicente's dead, he said finally. So are most of his lieutenants. The ones who survived know what happens if they come near you again. You destroyed an entire building. I've destroyed more for less. He caught her wrist as she reached for more gauze. You need to understand something, Betty. In my world, mercy is weakness. The moment I show compassion, someone interprets it as vulnerability. So when Vicente came to my home, threatened my people, put you in danger, there was only one response. Total annihilation. Total annihilation, he confirmed. No half measures. No warnings. Just absolute proof that crossing me has consequences. His grip on her wrist tightened slightly. Does that terrify you? Betty thought about the question honestly. A month ago, the answer would have been yes. But she'd watched Michael sell her twice, seen the men who'd wanted to hurt her, lived in a world where her compassion had been weaponized against her. Tio's violence wasn't random or cruel. It was purposeful, surgical, designed to protect the things he'd claimed as his own. No, she said. It should, but it doesn't. Something shifted in Tio's eyes. You're not leaving, are you? Where would I go? Back to an apartment I can't afford? To a hospital that wouldn't rehire me after I quit? To a life where Michael's debts follow me forever? She finished wrapping his hand, her fingers lingering on his skin. You erased my past. You gave me safety. You showed me what it looks like when someone actually protects the people they claim to care about. I never claimed to care about you. Didn't you? Betty met his eyes. You killed for me. You went to war for me. You leveled a building to make sure no one would ever touch me again. That's not indifference, Tio. He pulled her closer, his undamaged hand cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. If you stay, you're choosing this world. The violence, the danger, the blood that pays for the silk dresses and safe rooms. You're choosing to be mine in every way that matters. I know. The city will call you the first lady of the underworld. They'll fear you and hate you and want to destroy you just to hurt me. Let them try. Betty's voice was steady. I spent 2 years trying to fix a man who wanted to break me. Maybe it's time I stand beside someone who's already broken and doesn't pretend otherwise. Tio kissed her then, not gentle, not tentative, but with the intensity of someone claiming something precious. When they broke apart, Betty could taste smoke and violence and something that might have been the beginning of love, if either of them still believed in such things. Welcome home, Tio said. Betty smiled, and for the first time since the alley, it reached her eyes. I'm already there. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. Hit the subscribe button, as I will be bringing more interesting stories. Turn on your notification because you would not want to miss my story for anything.